Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold had been planning what they called Judgment Day for over a year, and on April 20th, 1999, their twisted fantasy became America's nightmare. These weren't just two angry teenagers having a bad day. They'd meticulously crafted a plan that was supposed to be far worse than what actually happened. The original scheme wasn't even about shooting up their school, it was about blowing it up entirely. Harris and Klebold had planted 20-pound propane tank bombs in the cafeteria, timed to detonate during the busiest lunch period when hundreds of students would be eating. If those bombs had worked, we'd be talking about one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in American history, not just a school shooting. But here's where their plans started falling apart. The bombs were duds. Harris and Klebold had arrived at school at 11:19 that morning, casually walked into the cafeteria with duffel bags containing their homemade explosives, set them down, and walked back out to the parking lot to wait for the fireworks. They'd even planted smaller bombs 3 miles away in a meadow earlier that morning, which partially exploded and should have distracted police, but the main event just wasn't happening. When they realized their cafeteria bombs weren't going off, that's when they grabbed their guns and decided to improvise. The shooting actually started outside the school. 17-year-old Rachel Scott was eating lunch on the grass when Harris and Klebold approached the building, and she became their first victim. 15-year-old Daniel Rohrbaugh was walking outside with friends when they shot him next. Witnesses heard one of them yelling, "This is what we always wanted to do. This is awesome." They weren't just killing people, they were enjoying every second of it. The whole massacre moved incredibly fast. The timeline shows the shooting began at 11:19, the first 911 call came just 4 minutes later, and by 11:34, all 13 victims were dead. These weren't random killings either. Harris and Klebold had specific targets in mind. When they entered the library where 52 students and 4 adults were hiding, they made their intentions crystal clear by shouting, "Anybody with a white hat or a sports emblem on it is dead." At Columbine, wearing white baseball caps was a tradition among athletes, and Harris and Klebold had a particular hatred for jocks. The library became a killing field. Kyle Velasquez, a disabled student sitting at the computers, was shot first. Then they systematically moved through the room, taunting students hiding under tables. They killed Stephen Kernow, Cassie Bernal, Isaiah Shoels, Matthew Kechter, Lauren Townsend, John Tomlin, Kelly Fleming, Daniel Mauser, and Corey DePuter. Throughout the entire massacre, surveillance cameras captured them acting like they were having the time of their lives, shouting, "Woo!" after shooting people. What's really chilling is how different Harris and Klebold were from each other. The FBI later concluded that Harris was a clinical psychopath who went to school that day to kill and didn't care if he died, while Klebold was severely depressed and wanted to die but didn't care if others died with him. Harris was the mastermind with a superiority complex who maintained a website with bomb-making instructions and violent threats. Klebold's journals revealed someone drowning in despair and self-hatred, writing extensively about suicide and his infinite sadness. His final words on their pre-recorded videos were, "Just know I'm going to a better place. I didn't like life too much." The entire active shooting lasted less than 15 minutes. At 12:08, Harris and Klebold returned to the library where they'd committed most of their murders and turned their guns on themselves. But here's what made the whole situation even more tragic. SWAT teams didn't enter the building until 3 hours later. Teacher Dave Sanders, who'd been shot trying to warn students, bled out in a science room waiting for help that came too late. 23 wounded people lay suffering for hours because police protocol at the time was to secure the perimeter and wait. By the time the smoke cleared, 13 people were dead and 24 others wounded. But the real impact of Columbine went far beyond those numbers. This wasn't just another school shooting. It became the template that inspired countless copycats and changed how America thinks about school safety forever. Harris and Klebold had succeeded in their ultimate goal of achieving infamy, and their legacy continues to haunt America decades later. Mitchell Johnson was 13 years old and Andrew Golden was just 11 when they pulled off one of the most calculated and cold-blooded school massacres in American history. March 24, 1998 started like any other day at Westside Middle School in Jonesboro, Arkansas, but it ended with 5 people dead and 10 others wounded in what became the deadliest middle school shooting in United States history. The night before their attack, Golden helped Johnson load his mother's 1991 Dodge Caravan with camping supplies, snack foods, and 9 stolen firearms taken directly from Golden's grandfather's house. They packed over 2,000 rounds of ammunition along with rifles, revolvers, and pistols including a Remington 7.42 30-06 rifle, Universal 30 caliber M1 carbine replica, Ruger 44 Magnum rifle, Smith & Wesson 38 special revolver, and several other deadly weapons. These weren't just kids playing around, they'd methodically planned every detail of their attack. Johnson had a seriously troubled background that should have raised red flags everywhere. According to his legal team, he'd been sexually abused by a caregiver when he was 6 and 7 years old. 1 year before the school shooting, Johnson had been charged with molesting a 3-year-old girl, but those records were sealed because of his age. Despite being active in church youth groups, Johnson showed clear signs of psychological and emotional problems that nobody properly addressed. The morning of March 24, Johnson took his mother's car keys without permission and drove to the school with Golden. They arrived late after deliberately missing their bus, then parked the van in a secluded wooded area behind the school where they planned to escape after the attack. At exactly 12:35 in the afternoon, as fifth period was just starting, Golden casually walked into the school and pulled the fire alarm. This wasn't random. They'd specifically chosen this time because they knew 87 students and 9 teachers would evacuate the building. Golden immediately ran back to the woods where Johnson was waiting with all the weapons positioned on a hill that gave them a clear view of the exit doors. When the unsuspecting students and teachers filed out for what they thought was just another fire drill, Johnson and Golden opened fire at 12:41. The attack lasted only 4 minutes, but they managed to fire 30 rounds with devastating accuracy. The victims were heartbreakingly young. 4 students died that day: Stephanie Johnson, Natalie Brooks, Paige Herring, and Brittany Varner, all between 11 and 12 years old. 32-year-old teacher Shannon Wright was also killed while trying to shield students from the gunfire. One of the wounded students was actually Golden's own cousin, showing just how indiscriminate their violence was. Students and teachers initially thought the gunshots were firecrackers or construction noise from workers building a new 5th grade building nearby. One student said they heard friends shouting, "It's all fake," as they tried to help wounded classmates. Teacher Shannon Wright used her own body as a shield to protect a wounded student, ultimately costing her life. Another teacher was checking students off her class list when she heard what sounded like pops, like firecrackers, and thought someone was trying to frighten the children. When police arrived, Johnson and Golden tried to flee into the woods toward their getaway van, but officers quickly caught them. They were found wearing camouflage clothing and trying to run away from the scene. The boys were among the youngest individuals ever charged with murder in the United States. During their trial, Johnson read a letter of apology to the victims' families and claimed he hadn't intended to target anyone specifically. He also wrote letters from jail expressing sadness and offering prayers for the victims, saying he wanted people to know the real Mitchell. Because of their ages, both boys were tried as juveniles and found guilty of 5 counts of murder. They received the maximum sentence allowed by Arkansas law at the time: confinement until they turned 21. Prosecutors admitted they would have sought the death penalty if not for the boys' ages. Johnson was released on his 21st birthday, August 11, 2005, while Golden was freed on May 7, 2007. Golden later died in a car accident on July 27, 2019. Johnson faced more legal troubles after his release, including arrests for marijuana possession and illegal weapons, but was released again in 2015. The West Side shooting established a terrifying new template that other school shooters would copy: using fire alarms to force victims into the open where they could be easily targeted. This tactic has been used in at least half a dozen school shootings since then. The massacre showed America that even elementary and middle school children could commit calculated mass murder, forever changing how schools approach safety and emergency procedures. Jeff Weiss was 16 years old and living on the Red Lake Indian Reservation in Minnesota when he decided to carry out one of the most devastating school shootings since Columbine. March 21, 2005 started as a normal Monday, but by the time it ended, 9 people were dead and 5 others wounded in what became Minnesota's deadliest school shooting. The massacre didn't begin at Red Lake Senior High School. It started at home. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Weiss retrieved a Ruger Mk2 caliber pistol from his bedroom and shot his grandfather, Darrell Lucier, while he was sleeping. Lucier was a tribal police sergeant who'd served the Red Lake community for years, and everyone called him by his nickname, Dash. Weiss shot him twice in the head and 10 times in the chest, making absolutely sure he was dead. After killing his grandfather, Weiss stole Lucier's police-issued weapons, including a .40 caliber Glock 23 pistol and a Remington 870 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. He also took a gun belt and bulletproof vest before shooting Michelle Sagana, his grandfather's 32-year-old girlfriend, twice in the head as she was carrying laundry upstairs. Then he put on his grandfather's bulletproof vest, got into the police squad car, and drove straight to Red Lake Senior High School. Weiss arrived at the school around 2:45 in the afternoon, pulling right up to the main entrance in his grandfather's marked police vehicle. The 300 students at Red Lake Senior High had no idea what was coming as Weiss walked through the front doors carrying multiple weapons. 2 unarmed security guards were manning a metal detector at the entrance when Weiss opened fire, killing Derek Brunn instantly while the other guard managed to escape. The shooting spree lasted exactly 9 minutes, but Weiss managed to fire 59 total shots during his rampage. He fired 14 shots at his grandfather's house and 45 more at the school, using 37 rounds from his grandfather's Glock handgun, 14 from his Ruger pistol, and 8 from the shotgun. Weiss moved methodically through the school's main corridor, targeting an English classroom where he killed 3 students and 1 teacher while wounding 3 others. What made the Red Lake shooting particularly chilling was how Weiss seemed to enjoy what he was doing. Multiple witnesses said he was smiling as he shot people, and several survivors reported that he asked students if they believed in God, shooting them if they said yes or hesitated to answer. This was a direct reference to the widely publicized exchange during Columbine between the shooters and their victims. Weiss had even used the screen name, "Do You Believe in God?" online. Ryan Ogenash was wounded when he affirmed his Christian faith, while Lance Crow was also shot for refusing to answer Weiss's question about God. 16-year-old Jeffrey May tried to wrestle Weiss inside the classroom and stabbed him in the stomach with a pencil, which allowed other students to escape to safety. For his heroic actions, May was shot twice in the neck and once in the jaw, leaving him seriously injured. At 2:52 in the afternoon, Weiss returned to the main entrance where he killed 2 more students, Chase Lucier and Dwayne Lewis, and wounded 2 others. Police had arrived quickly and engaged Weiss in a gunfight that FBI Special Agent Paul McCabe said lasted about 4 minutes. None of the police officers were injured during the shootout. After being hit 3 times by police gunfire in his lower back, right leg, and right arm, Weiss retreated to the classroom where he'd killed the teacher and 3 students. He yelled, "I have hostages," before shooting and killing 2 more students who were hiding under tables. Then he leaned against a wall, put the shotgun barrel to his chin, and fired, killing himself instantly at 2:58 in the afternoon. Weiss's background revealed a deeply troubled teenager who'd experienced devastating trauma. His father had committed suicide 4 years earlier, and his mother was severely injured in a car accident that left her confined to a wheelchair in a nursing home. He'd been struggling with depression and had been prescribed Prozac after attempting suicide twice in May and June of 2004. Weiss had also been involved with neo-Nazi websites, using the German term for "angel of death" to identify himself online. The Red Lake Reservation itself was dealing with severe social problems including high unemployment, violence, suicide rates, and poor housing conditions. A 2004 study found that many high school students on the reservation had contemplated suicide. The massacre left the tight-knit community of 5,000 Ojibwe tribal members devastated and searching for answers about how to prevent such tragedies. 15-year-old Kip Kinkle was already in serious trouble when he walked into Thurston High School on May 21, 1998, but nobody could have predicted the absolute carnage he was about to unleash. Just one day earlier, Kinkle had been suspended from school for bringing a stolen gun to campus, and his Spanish teacher parents, Bill and Faith Kinkle, were devastated by their son's behavior. What they didn't know was that their disappointment would cost them their lives. On May 20th, around 1:30 in the afternoon, Bill Kinkle picked up his troubled son from the Springfield police station where he'd been held after his arrest. They stopped at Bob's Burger Express on Main Street where Kip ordered his usual, a brute with no tomato, no onion, and small fries, while his father sat across from him, not eating, asking simply, why? Once they got home, Bill called Thurston High School to discuss his son's future at the school. That phone call would be one of the last things he ever did. Sometime that evening, Kip retrieved his father's 9mm Glock pistol and shot both parents to death in their family home. Bill Kinkle, a retired Spanish teacher who'd worked at both Thurston High and Lane Community College, and Faith Kinkle, who still taught Spanish at Springfield High School, were found dead the next day. These weren't just random killings. Kip later said he killed them to spare them the embarrassment of what he was planning to do next. The next morning, May 21st, Kip loaded up with an arsenal that would make a small army jealous. He packed a sawed-off semi-automatic .22 caliber rifle, 2 semi-automatic handguns, a knife with a 6-inch blade, a pocket knife, and 1,177 rounds of ammunition. Then he drove to Thurston High School in Springfield, Oregon, ready to make history in the worst possible way. Around 7:50 in the morning, before classes officially started, between 100 and 200 students were hanging out in the cafeteria when Kip arrived. He'd already shot 2 students outside the building, 17-year-old Ben Walker and another student named Ryan Atterbury, before entering the school. Walker would die within 24 hours from his head wound. When Kip walked into that cafeteria wearing a trench coat with a rifle slung at his hip, some students initially thought it was a prank. 17-year-old Jacob Riker was sitting at a table with friends, including his girlfriend, when he heard what sounded like firecrackers. But when he saw Kip point the rifle at a female student's head and pull the trigger, only to have the gun fail to fire, Jacob knew this was deadly serious. Kip climbed up on a table and opened fire, calmly spraying bullets across the crowded room while students dove for cover and screamed in terror. The chaos was absolute. Breaking glass, students running and diving under tables, blood everywhere. Wrestling coach Gary Bowden, an Army veteran, said he knew exactly what had happened the moment he walked into the room because he could smell the blood. 17-year-old Michael Nicolausen was shot in the head at point-blank range and died instantly. Multiple students were hit by the 50 rounds Kip fired from his .22 caliber rifle and 1 round from his 9mm Glock. The entire shooting rampage lasted about 5 minutes, but in that short time, Kip managed to kill 2 students and wound 25 others. The shooting only stopped because of Jacob Riker's incredible heroism. After being shot in the chest, Jacob saw Kip trying to reload his rifle and made a split-second decision that saved countless lives. Despite his gunshot wound, Jacob got up and charged 20 feet across the cafeteria, tackling Kip to the ground. During their struggle, Kip reached for his 9mm pistol and shot Jacob through his left index finger, but Jacob refused to let go. Several other students, including Jacob's younger brother, jumped in to help pin Kip down until teachers and police arrived. When officers finally wrestled Kip into custody, his first words were, "Just shoot me." A student who'd been helping hold him down got up and punched Kip in the face before police could stop him. By then, The cafeteria looked like a war zone with blood on the walls and bullet holes everywhere. Kip's background revealed a deeply troubled teenager who'd been struggling for years. He had dyslexia and had repeated first grade, but his problems went far deeper than learning disabilities. His English class journals were filled with murderous fantasies, and he'd recently threatened to blow up a school pep rally. There was also a history of serious mental illness on both sides of his family that his parents had concealed from psychologists. On September 24, 1999, Kip pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and 26 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 111 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Jacob Riker, the hero who stopped the massacre, received the Carnegie Medal for his incredible bravery and later enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz chose Valentine's Day, February 14, 2018, to turn Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School into a killing field that would traumatize America and spark the largest student-led gun control movement in history. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. Cruz had been planning this massacre for months, and the warning signs were everywhere, but nobody put the pieces together until it was too late. At 2:19 in the afternoon, exactly 20 minutes before dismissal time, Cruz stepped out of an Uber at the school he'd been expelled from just over a year earlier. He was carrying a black rifle case and backpack, looking completely ordinary to anyone who didn't know what was inside. Campus security monitor Andrew Medina actually recognized Cruz immediately and called him the "crazy boy" over his radio, warning colleagues that this kid had been flagged as likely to commit violence at the school. But instead of stopping Cruz or calling a lockdown, Medina just unlocked the gates and let him walk right onto campus. Cruz headed straight for Building 12, the freshman building, a 3-story structure that housed 30 classrooms and was packed with about 900 students and 30 teachers. At 2:21, he entered the building and immediately went to the stairwell where he started assembling his weapon, a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 semi-automatic rifle that he'd legally purchased for $618.17 from Sunrise Tactical Supply. The gun store owner, Michael Morrison, later testified that when Cruz picked up the rifle, he asked what the teenager planned to do with it, and Cruz casually replied, "I go shooting with my friends on the weekends. I just want my own stuff." As Cruz was putting his rifle together, freshman Chris McKenna walked out of classroom 1216 to use the restroom and stumbled right into the nightmare. Cruz looked up at McKenna and said, "You'd better get out of here, something bad's about to happen." McKenna didn't need to be told twice. He bolted from the building and immediately started warning staff members, but by then Cruz was already moving. The massacre began at exactly 2:21 when Cruz entered the first-floor hallway and spotted 3 students, Martin Duque Anguiano, Gina Montalto, and Luke Hoyer, standing outside room 1215. He shot all 3 dead instantly while 14-year-old Ashley Baez was wounded in her upper leg. Then Cruz systematically moved through the hallway, firing through the windows of 4 closed classroom doors, killing 6 more students and wounding 13 others. 2 staff members were also murdered on that first floor. The entire first floor became a war zone in minutes. 37-year-old football coach Aaron Faze heard the gunshots and immediately ran toward the building to help evacuate students. Faze was shot and killed while shielding students from Cruz's bullets. Athletic director Chris Hickson also rushed toward the danger and was gunned down trying to protect kids. Cruz then moved to the second floor, but finding most classrooms locked, he quickly headed to the 3rd floor where he continued his rampage. 35-year-old geography teacher Scott Beigel was shot and killed while trying to lock his classroom door and get students to safety. 14-year-old Jamie Gutenberg was murdered along with Cara Loughran, Joaquin Oliver, Meadow Pollock, and Peter Wong. The shooting lasted less than 4 minutes, but Cruz managed to fire over 100 rounds, systematically hunting students and staff through 3 floors. 17 people were killed and 17 others wounded in what became one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. After his killing spree, Cruz calmly dropped his rifle and backpack on the 3rd floor and blended in with fleeing students. He actually walked out of the building with other survivors, then went to a Walmart where he bought a drink at the Subway inside before heading to McDonald's. Police arrested him about an hour and 20 minutes after the shooting while he was walking down a residential street in Coconut Creek. Cruz's background revealed a deeply troubled individual who'd been showing violent tendencies for years. He'd been expelled from Marjory Stoneman Douglas in 2017 for disciplinary problems and had a documented history of threatening other students. Multiple people had reported concerns about Cruz to law enforcement, including the FBI, but nothing was done to stop him. He'd even posted on social media about wanting to become a professional school shooter. The Parkland shooting ignited a massive student-led movement demanding gun control reform. Students like Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg became national figures, organizing March for Our Lives, which drew hundreds of thousands of protesters to Washington, D.C. The massacre also led to Florida raising the minimum age to purchase rifles from 18 to 21. On October 13, 2022, after pleading guilty to 17 counts of first-degree murder and 17 counts of attempted murder, Cruz was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The jury had rejected the death penalty, citing his mental health issues and troubled childhood. 14-year-old Barry Dale Loukaitis had been fantasizing about becoming a gunslinger for months before February 2, 1996, and on that cold Friday afternoon in Moses Lake, Washington, he finally got his chance to live out his violent Wild West fantasy. Loukaitis wasn't just some random angry teenager having a bad day. He'd been methodically planning this massacre while his entire world crumbled around him at home. His parents were going through a nasty divorce, his father was having an affair, and his mother Joanne had actually told Barry about her own violent fantasies of tying up her husband and his girlfriend before shooting herself in front of them. That morning, Loukaitis dressed himself like a character straight out of a Western movie, wearing a long black duster coat that would conceal the arsenal he was about to unleash on his classmates. He armed himself with 3 weapons stolen from his father: a .30 caliber hunting rifle, a .22 caliber revolver, and a .25 semi-automatic pistol, then calmly walked from his house directly to Frontier Middle School. The fact that his dad owned multiple firearms and apparently didn't secure them properly would soon cost innocent people their lives. During 5th period, Loukaitis entered his algebra classroom where 24 students were working on math problems with their teacher, 49-year-old Leona Cares. Before anyone could react to this kid walking in wearing a gunslinger costume, Loukaitis cocked his lever-action rifle and immediately shot 14-year-old Manuel Vela Jr. almost point-blank in the chest. As other students tried to dive for cover under their desks, Loukaitis systematically shot Arnold Fritz and 13-year-old Natalie Hintz as they desperately tried to get away from the gunfire. When teacher Leona Cares saw the carnage unfolding and exclaimed, "No, no," Loukaitis turned his rifle on her and shot her in the back as she tried to hide behind her desk. The bullet hit her in the chest, and she died almost instantly. According to witness testimony, Cares was holding a piece of chalk in one hand and an eraser in the other when she was murdered, showing she'd been in the middle of teaching when this nightmare began. Manuel Vela also died within minutes from his gunshot wound. Arnold Fritz had been shot through the chest but somehow managed to stand up and walk to the back of the classroom before collapsing on the floor. Students watched in horror as their classmates struggled to breathe while bleeding out. Natalie Hintz was screaming in agony from gunshot wounds to her right arm and abdomen, and she'd eventually need to be airlifted to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle for emergency surgery. The scene inside that classroom was absolutely horrific, with dozens of rifle casings scattered across the floor and blood everywhere after the initial shooting. Loukaitis backed himself into a corner of the room where he couldn't be seen from the windows or doorway and began holding his surviving classmates hostage at gunpoint. His plan was to use one of the terrified students as a human shield so he could safely escape the building. But then John Lane, the school's physical education teacher and wrestling coach, heard the gunshots and came running toward the danger instead of away from it. When Lane entered that blood-soaked classroom and saw the carnage, he immediately volunteered to be Loukaitis' hostage. Lane had been a champion wrestler in his youth and knew he might be able to overpower the teenager if he got the chance. Loukitis accepted Lane's offer and kept the rifle pointed directly at the teacher while planning his escape route. But then Lane saw his opportunity. During a split second when Loukitis was holding the rifle pointed at the ceiling instead of at him, Lane charged forward and tackled the shooter. The former wrestling champion pinned Loukitis and his weapon against the classroom wall, ending the massacre exactly 10 minutes after it had begun. Lane held the teenage killer on the ground until police arrived at the scene. His heroic actions undoubtedly saved multiple lives, as Loukitis still had ammunition remaining and had shown no signs of stopping his killing spree. Loukitis was tried as an adult despite being only 14 years old and convicted on 3 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. He was originally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but in 2017 he was resentenced to 189 years. During his resentencing hearing, family members of the victims confronted Loukitis directly, with hero teacher John Lane asking him, "Why did you do it? Why that day and that classroom?" Loukitis finally apologized to the victims' families over 20 years later during his 2017 resentencing hearing, writing in a handwritten letter that he'd never apologized before because he feared it would only add insult to injury. He described himself as a hostile and rude 14-year-old who should have pleaded guilty instead of putting the community through an agonizing trial. The families confronted him directly, with victims' relatives describing how their lives had been forever destroyed by his 10 minutes of violence. Arnold Fritz's mother told him her son had dreamed of becoming a teacher, while Leona Kerr's family explained how they still struggled with nightmares decades later. Loukitis was resentenced to 189 years in prison and remains incarcerated today with no possibility of parole. He's earned his high school diploma behind bars and works as a teacher's aide, but he'll likely spend the rest of his life paying for those deadly moments in that Moses Lake classroom. The Frontier Middle School shooting became historically significant as one of the first modern teenage school massacres, occurring 3 years before Columbine and establishing patterns that later killers would follow. Loukitis's Wild West gunslinger costume, his use of multiple weapons, and his detailed planning became a template for future school shooters. The case also made John Lane a national hero and changed how schools trained staff to respond to active threats. Moses Lake's small farming community was forever scarred, proving that school violence could happen anywhere in America, setting the stage for the epidemic of teenage massacres that would plague the nation for decades to come. "17-year-old Demetrius Pagurtzis walked into Santa Fe High School on May 18, 2018, wearing his signature black trench coat and carrying weapons stolen from his own father's gun collection. This wasn't just any Friday morning, it was the day he'd been planning to make international headlines by turning his art classroom into a slaughterhouse. At exactly 7:32 in the morning, while most students were still settling into first period, Pagurtzis entered the school's art complex and began firing a shotgun into a classroom full of unsuspecting teenagers. 15-year-old Isabel Laments was sitting in art class drawing geometric shapes when she heard the first gunshots. She and 7 other students barricaded themselves in a supply closet that connected 2 art classrooms, lying on the floor and whispering, "I love you," to their mothers on the phone while holding each other's hands. But Pagurtzis knew exactly where they were hiding. According to witnesses, he walked into that first art classroom and started shooting through the supply closet door with his shotgun, forcing the terrified students to make a desperate run for their lives. When he spotted a student he recognized, he actually said, "Surprise," before shooting them in the chest. Even more chilling, one wounded victim reported that Pagurtzis was singing "Another One Bites the Dust" in between shots, treating the whole massacre like some twisted karaoke performance. This wasn't some random outburst of teenage rage. Pagurtzis had been methodically planning this attack for months. 3 weeks before the shooting, he'd posted a photo on Instagram showing a knife and handgun spread out on a mattress. His social media presence was absolutely terrifying in hindsight. On April 30th, he'd posted a picture of a t-shirt with the words, "Born to Kill," on his Facebook page. He also shared photos of his black trench coat covered with disturbing symbols including an iron cross, a communist hammer and sickle, and a satanic goat head. Pogortses had captioned that trench coat photo with explanations for each symbol: hammer and sickle equals rebellion, rising sun equals kamikaze tactics, iron cross equals bravery, Baphomet equals evil, Cthulhu equals power. This kid was obsessed with violence and death imagery, following 8 different gun fan pages on Instagram and only 13 accounts total. Incredibly, he also followed President Trump, the White House, and multiple Trump family member accounts. The shooting lasted exactly 30 minutes, but Pogortses managed to kill 10 people and wound 13 others in that short time frame. 8 students and 2 substitute teachers lost their lives, including art room aide Cynthia Tisdale, a beloved mother of 4 whose family described her as someone who loved children and teaching. Exchange student Sabika Sheikh from Pakistan was also among the dead, just weeks before she was supposed to return home. What made this massacre particularly horrifying was that Pogortses came prepared for total destruction. Police found 4 pipe bombs, a Molotov cocktail, a carbon dioxide device wrapped in duct tape, and pressure cooker bombs similar to the ones used in the Boston Marathon bombing. If those explosives had worked properly, the death toll could have been catastrophic. Fortunately, authorities later determined that his homemade bombs were completely non-functional. The weapons Pogortses used, a shotgun and .38 caliber revolver, belonged to his father, Antonios Pogortses, who legally owned them but apparently had no idea his son had taken them. Antonios had immigrated from Greece in his mid-20s and ran an agricultural machinery business in the Santa Fe area. Despite multiple warning signs, including Pogortses wearing that menacing trench coat to school almost every day, nobody connected the dots until it was too late. Students and teachers described Pogortses as quiet but not creepy, an honor roll student who played junior varsity football and danced with his local Greek Orthodox church group. However, at least one witness claimed he'd been bullied by multiple students and coaches, though the school denied allegations about coaches. His former teachers said they'd never seen him draw or write anything suspicious in his journals. Santa Fe ISD police officers confronted Pogortses within 4 minutes of the shooting starting, engaging him in a gunfight that left school resource officer John Barnes in critical condition. At 8:02 in the morning, after being wounded by police gunfire, Pogortses finally surrendered as he exited Art Lab 2. His first words to officers were reportedly threats to shoot them. Pogortses has been found incompetent to stand trial multiple times and remains committed to a mental health facility. In August 2024, a jury found his parents not liable for the massacre, despite victims' families arguing they were negligent for allowing their son access to weapons. Another is Charles Whitman, who had been planning the deadliest mass shooting in American history up to that point, and August 1, 1966 was the day he finally snapped. This wasn't some teenage outburst. Whitman was a former Marine sharpshooter and engineering student at the University of Texas who'd been experiencing severe headaches and violent thoughts for months. What made his case so chilling was that he actually requested an autopsy in his suicide notes because he wanted to know what was wrong with his brain. The massacre began in the early morning hours when Whitman drove to his mother's apartment near downtown Austin at around 3 in the morning. Margaret Elizabeth Whitman was asleep when her son stabbed her in the chest and then shot her in the back of the head. He left a note saying he loved her but couldn't stand the thought of her suffering embarrassment from what he was about to do. Then he drove home to his small South Austin house where he murdered his wife Kathleen as she slept in their bedroom around dawn. From 3 in the morning until 11:30, Whitman methodically prepared for what he called his rampage. He wrote several notes explaining his actions, bought ammunition and a shotgun from hardware and sporting goods stores, and packed survival gear including food, water, gasoline, rope, and binoculars along with 6 different firearms and 700 rounds of ammunition. This guy was planning for an extended siege, not just a quick shooting spree. At 11:30 in the morning, wearing overalls to disguise himself as a maintenance worker, Whitman arrived at the University of Texas campus and entered the iconic Tower building. He wheeled a footlocker on a dolly to the 27th floor elevator, then hauled all his gear up 3 flights of stairs to the 28th floor reception area. His first victim on campus was Edna Townsley, a university receptionist working on the 28th floor who he bludgeoned to death with a rifle butt. Minutes later, the Gabauer family from Texarkana walked up the stairwell as tourists wanting to visit the observation deck. Whitman used an illegally modified shotgun to kill Mark Gabauer and his aunt Marguerite Lamport instantly while severely wounding Mark's mother and Marguerite's nephew. Then he barricaded the stairway entrance and positioned himself on the observation deck 231 feet above the campus at 11:48 in the morning. Whitman began firing down at people crossing the campus and walking on nearby streets. His first shots hit Claire Wilson, an 18-year-old student who was 8 months pregnant, killing her unborn son instantly. The baby became the youngest victim of the massacre. For the next 96 minutes, Whitman systematically picked off targets with terrifying precision using multiple rifles, including a Remington 706 with a 4-power scope. Students and faculty had no idea what was happening at first. Many thought construction workers were dropping tools or that someone was playing with firecrackers. But when people started falling and blood splattered the concrete, the horrifying reality set in. Whitman didn't discriminate. He shot at professors, students, police officers, and even children walking with their parents. Austin police officer Billy Speed was killed while trying to approach the tower, becoming one of 17 total victims. The entire campus became a war zone as hundreds of people dove for cover behind trees, cars, and buildings. Students and civilians risked their lives running into the line of fire to drag wounded people to safety. Some private citizens even grabbed their own hunting rifles and started shooting back at Whitman from the ground, though they were too far away to be effective. Vietnam veteran Brehan Ellison repeatedly ran into the open to rescue wounded people, later telling reporters his strategy was to run hard and keep low. Multiple law enforcement agencies responded, but nobody knew how to handle this type of situation because nothing like it had ever happened before. The concept of an active shooter didn't exist in 1966. Police officers Ray Martinez and Houston McCoy, along with civilian Alan Crum and Officer Jerry Day, finally made it up to the observation deck. At 1:24 in the afternoon, Martinez and McCoy shot and killed Whitman, ending his reign of terror. The final body count was staggering: 17 people dead including Whitman himself, and 31 others wounded. This was the deadliest mass shooting in American history at the time and remained the worst campus shooting until Virginia Tech in 2007. The victims included students, faculty, tourists, and even Austin residents just walking down the street. The autopsy Whitman had requested revealed a pecan-sized brain tumor pressing against his amygdala, the part of the brain that controls emotions and aggression. The tumor was identified as a glioblastoma multiforme, an aggressive form of brain cancer. A commission led by Texas Governor John Connally concluded that while they couldn't definitively link the tumor to Whitman's actions, it conceivably could have contributed to his inability to control his emotions and actions. Anthony Thomas Solomon Jr. was just 15 years old when he turned Heritage High School in Conyers, Georgia into a nightmare on May 20, 1999. What made this shooting particularly chilling was that it happened exactly 1 month after Columbine, proving that the copycat effect was already taking hold across America. Solomon didn't even try to hide his fascination with firearms. His classmates later told investigators he'd been obsessed with guns for months and had actually mentioned shooting people at school before the attack. The morning of May 20th started like any other Friday at Heritage High School, but by 7:25 in the morning, Solomon had already broken into his stepfather's locked gun cabinet and stolen a .22 caliber rifle and a .357 Magnum revolver. This wasn't some impulsive decision. Solomon had been planning this attack and knew exactly where his parents kept their weapons. What's really disturbing is that multiple friends later said Solomon had lots of guns at home and was constantly talking about them. Around 8:15 in the morning, while over 100 students were hanging out in the school's common area before first period, Solomon calmly walked in carrying his rifle and opened fire. Unlike other school shooters who aimed to kill as many people as possible, witnesses said Solomon deliberately aimed below the waist, almost like he wanted to wound people rather than murder them. He methodically fired 11 shots from his rifle, hitting 6 different students and sending the entire commons area into absolute chaos. The scene was terrifying as students dove for cover, screaming and running in every direction while Solomon continued shooting. 15-year-old Stephanie Laster was critically wounded and rushed to the hospital, while the other 5 victims suffered what doctors called non-life-threatening injuries. But just because nobody died doesn't mean this wasn't traumatic. These were real teenagers getting shot by their classmate in what should have been a safe space. After emptying his rifle, Solomon ran outside the school building and fired 3 more shots from his revolver. Then he did something that showed just how messed up his mental state was. He knelt down on the ground, pointed the revolver at his own head, and tried to kill himself. But instead of pulling the trigger, he started crying and yelling, "Oh my God, I'm so scared." 2 assistant principals, Chris Dial and Cecil Brewer, managed to talk him into surrendering without firing that final shot. What made this case even more bizarre was that a PBS film crew was actually on campus at Heritage High School when the shooting happened. They'd been in Conyers filming a documentary about a sexually transmitted disease outbreak that had affected local teenagers back in 1996. The crew ended up capturing footage and interviews that provided incredible insight into how a school community deals with sudden violence. Solomon's background revealed a troubled teenager dealing with serious psychological issues. During his trial, his defense attorney argued that he was mentally ill and needed treatment rather than prison time. Solomon himself told the court, "I apologize to the court and everyone who was hurt. I'm sorry for what I did. I don't understand why I did it. I see myself as a little confused and I'd like to get help." The legal proceedings dragged on for over a year before Solomon finally pleaded guilty but mentally ill in November 2000. Superior Court Judge Sidney Nation sentenced him to 40 years in prison plus 65 years of probation, saying he would err on the side of safety for the community. Solomon's attorney had recommended only 10 years and indicated they might appeal the sentence. But here's where the story gets really controversial. Solomon's sentence was later reduced from 40 years to just 20 years in prison. He ended up serving only 17 years before being released on parole on July 26, 2016. His early release caused outrage among the victims' families, with one father calling it a huge mistake. Michael Cheek, whose son Jason was shot twice during the attack, described the original sentencing as bittersweet because he felt sorry for Solomon and his family but believed he needed to be punished. The Heritage High School shooting proved that Columbine wasn't just a one-time tragedy, it was the beginning of a new era where troubled teenagers would use school shootings as their way of dealing with personal problems. Solomon's case also highlighted the ongoing debate about how to handle juvenile offenders who commit violent crimes while dealing with mental health issues. Even though nobody died at Heritage High, the psychological trauma affected the entire Conyers community for years. The shooting showed America that even when these attacks don't result in deaths, they still devastate families, schools, and communities in ways that can last forever. 16-year-old Luke Woodham had already committed 1 murder before he ever set foot on Pearl High School campus on October 1, 1997, and that victim was the person who'd brought him into this world. Marion Woodham was 50 years old and getting ready for her morning jog when her own son attacked her with a butcher knife in their Pearl, Mississippi home. The autopsy revealed something absolutely horrifying. Luke had stabbed his mother 18 times total, including 11 slash wounds and 7 deep stab wounds that pierced her heart and lungs. At his trial, Woodham would claim he couldn't even remember killing the woman who'd raised him. After brutally murdering his mother, Woodham calmly took her Toyota Tercel and drove to Pearl High School where he was a junior. This wasn't some random outburst of teenage rage. Woodham had been planning this massacre and even wrote a manifesto explaining his twisted reasoning. He wore a long black trench coat to conceal the .30-30 rifle he'd stolen from his older brother, who'd owned it legally. The rifle wasn't the only weapon Woodham had access to. His family apparently had multiple guns in their home. When Woodham entered the school that morning, he immediately found his friend Justin Sledge in the commons area and handed him the manifesto. Sledge realized exactly what was about to happen and quickly gathered some friends to hide in the library while Woodham began his killing spree. One witness later testified that Sledge told him not to turn around no matter what he heard, not to look back, and just to keep moving forward. Sledge knew his friend was about to become a killer. Woodham's primary target was 17-year-old Christina Menifee, his ex-girlfriend who'd broken up with him and completely shattered his world. The breakup had sent Woodham into a spiral of depression and rage that ultimately led to this moment. He found Christina first and shot her dead, fulfilling what he later described as getting his revenge on her. Then he killed 16-year-old Lydia K. Dew, another student who had nothing to do with his personal problems but became a victim of his uncontrolled fury. After murdering the two girls, Woodham continued firing his rifle throughout the school hallway, wounding 7 more students in what he would later call his reign of terror. The entire shooting lasted only minutes, but Woodham managed to shoot 9 people total before he tried to escape. Students were screaming and running in every direction as this armed teenager stalked through their school with a high-power hunting rifle. But Woodham's escape plan fell apart thanks to the incredible heroism of Pearl High School assistant principal Joel Myrick. When Myrick heard the gunshots, he didn't hide or wait for police. He ran to his truck and grabbed his own .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Myrick spotted Woodham trying to flee the parking lot in his mother's car and shouted for him to stop. When Woodham kept driving, Myrick pursued him and somehow caused Woodham to lose control of the vehicle. Then Myrick held the teenage killer at gunpoint until police arrived. During his trial, the disturbing truth about Woodham's motivation came out. He testified through tears that the murders were the result of his heartbreak over losing Christina and his dangerous fascination with occult rituals. Woodham had fallen under the influence of 19-year-old Grant Boyette, who'd introduced him to a cult-like group called the Croth. Boyette had apparently convinced Woodham that he needed to kill his mother and go to school to get revenge on Christina. Woodham sobbed in court saying he was so sorry and trying to explain why he'd opened fire on students. The conspiracy went deeper than just Woodham and Boyette. 6 other teenagers were also charged with conspiracy related to the shootings. Some of these kids were also linked to the Croth, which appeared to be some kind of a cult group that promoted violence. This wasn't just one disturbed teenager acting alone, it was an organized plot involving multiple young people. Circuit Judge Samak Richardson sentenced Woodham to 2 life terms in prison for the killings plus 20 years for each of the 7 aggravated assault charges. Christina's father, speaking at the sentencing, said he hoped a message would be sent nationwide that this type of crime wouldn't be tolerated in society. He also said Christina would be missed by everyone and that all the great things she would have accomplished would be missed too. The Pearl High School shooting was considered one of the first modern mass school shootings and helped establish the terrifying pattern that would culminate in Columbine less than 2 years later. Woodham is still serving his life sentence in Mississippi State Prison and remains there today. YouTube. 16-year-old Evan Ramsey had been telling people for 2 weeks exactly what he planned to do on February 19, 1997, and absolutely nobody tried to stop him. More than 15 students at Bethel Regional High School in Bethel, Alaska knew that Ramsey was planning to bring a gun to school and start shooting, but instead of warning teachers or trying to talk him out of it, some of his friends actually helped him plan the massacre. This wasn't just a failure of one troubled teenager, it was a failure of an entire community that knew violence was coming and did nothing to prevent it. The morning of February 19th, Ramsey hid a Mossberg 512-gauge shotgun under his jacket and rode the school bus to Bethel Regional High School just like any other day. But this definitely wasn't going to be any other day because multiple students had actually brought cameras to school specifically to record Ramsey's shooting spree. Some kids were positioned in the library balcony overlooking the student commons area, waiting with their cameras ready to capture the violence they knew was about to unfold. These weren't just innocent bystanders, they were essentially creating a live audience for murder. When Ramsey walked into the student commons area around 8 in the morning, he immediately spotted 15-year-old Josh Palacios sitting at a table talking with friends. Palacios was starting to turn around and stand up when Ramsey pulled out the shotgun and shot him directly in the stomach. The single blast killed Palacios and wounded 2 other students, SM and RL, who were sitting across from him. Palacios later died during emergency surgery, becoming Ramsey's first victim. Art teacher Rain Athanas heard the gunshots and ran into the commons area where she found Ramsey firing randomly at the ceiling. Athanas courageously tried to convince Ramsey to surrender, but he completely ignored her and walked toward the main lobby. There he found 56-year-old Principal Ron Edwards and shot him twice, once in the back and once in the shoulder, killing him instantly. Edwards had been a respected educator who'd worked at the school for years, and his murder shocked the entire Bethel community. After killing the principal, Ramsey retreated back to the commons area where police had already arrived. When officers confronted him, Ramsey fired one shot at them before an officer returned fire, though Ramsey wasn't hit. Then something really bizarre happened. Ramsey placed the shotgun barrel under his chin like he was going to kill himself, but instead of pulling the trigger, he said, "I don't want to die," and laid the weapon on the ground. He surrendered without any further violence, ending a massacre that lasted only 15 minutes. Ramsey's background revealed a deeply damaged kid who'd been failed by everyone around him. His classmates constantly bullied him and called him Screech, after the nerdy character from the TV show Saved by the Bell. But the bullying was just the tip of the iceberg. Ramsey had experienced horrific abuse throughout his childhood. His mother lived with a series of violent men who physically abused Ramsey and his brothers. He'd also been sexually abused by an older boy in one of his foster homes. The family history gets even more disturbing when you learn about Ramsey's father, Don, who'd committed his own shooting spree at the Anchorage Times newspaper in October 1986. Don was angry because the publisher pulled his political attack ad, so he stormed the building with a high-powered rifle and smoke grenades, though fortunately nobody was hurt. After Don went to prison, Ramsey's mother's alcoholism got worse, and Ramsey and his brothers were constantly shuffled between foster homes. What makes the Bethel shooting particularly disturbing is how Ramsey's friends enabled and encouraged his violence. James Randall actually taught Ramsey how to load and fire the shotgun. Matthew Charles told him about the infamy he'd gained from committing a school shooting. According to Ramsey, his friends even suggested additional targets, telling him that while I'm at it, I might as well go shoot this person and that person and that person. One friend even suggested bringing cameras to record the massacre, so he could save the memory. In later interviews from prison, Ramsey made a shocking claim that he didn't realize shooting people would actually kill them. He told ABC News, "I honestly believed that if you shoot somebody, that they would get back up," and compared his understanding of guns to video games. Whether this was genuine naivete or an attempt to minimize his responsibility, Ramsey was sentenced to 210 years in prison and is still serving that sentence today. The Bethel shooting highlighted a critical problem in American schools. Students regularly know about planned violence but don't report it. These 11 massacres represent a dark evolution in American violence, spanning from 1966 to 2018 and showing how teenage killers learn from each other's methods. From Charles Whitman's calculated tower sniper attack to Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold's failed bombing plot, from Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden's fire alarm ambush to Jeff Weiss's reservation rampage, each case revealed new depths of premeditated cruelty committed by increasingly younger perpetrators. What's most haunting is how these tragedies created a blueprint for future killers. Luke Woodham's occult-influenced revenge, Kip Kinkel's family annihilation, Nicholas Cruz's Valentine's Day massacre, Demetrius Bagurtzis's trenchcoat symbolism, T.J. Solomon's Columbine copycat attack, and Evan Ramsey's audience of camera-wielding classmates all followed patterns established by earlier shooters. These weren't isolated incidents but connected tragedies that forever changed how America thinks about school safety, mental health, gun access, and the devastating reality that children can commit unspeakable acts of violence against their peers, teachers, and communities.